We researched the 7 most popular IELTS speaking tips and tricks so you don't have to. We're going to show you what those 7 tips do and whether they increase your score or lower your score. And we're also going to show you what IDP and the British Council say about these 7 tips so you can go and do the speaking test with complete confidence. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start off with one of the most popular speaking tips. I want you to watch each of these students start the test and think about what tip they might be using. Welcome to the IELTS speaking test. Please sit down.
Hi, how are you? My name is Priyanka Bhatia. Very nice to meet you, Chris. I was really looking forward to coming today. You have a really nice examination hall. Is that what you call it? Let me give you my ID. How's your day been so far?
Not bad.
Would you like something to eat or drink?
Let's start.
You look amazing, by the way. I really like your shirt.
Okay.
Your haircut.
Okay.
It's so good.
Thank you. Welcome to the IELTS speaking test. Please sit down. May I see your ID, please? So did you spot the tip? If you go online, you'll find thousands of tips on how to greet the examiner. But does greeting the examiner actually improve your score? Does it affect it in any way? So guys, if you look at the guidance from IELTS, it talks about part 1 and what happens in part 1. So the examiner will ask you about yourself and general questions like work, family, studies, things like that. But before part 1, you have to come in and you have to talk to the examiner. They'll just ask your name. They'll ask to see your ID, and this is where you will greet the examiner in some way, maybe a little bit differently to how you just demoed it.
Yeah.
But that's when you will greet them. But the most important thing to know is you're not being assessed at this point. We call this part 0. So you have part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 0 is when you come in, you talk to the examiner for the first time, they look at your ID, they ask your name, all of those things, but the exam has not started yet. It's really important to understand that. But many people online think that what you do in that first part actually does improve your score. So let's see what the official IELTS website and the official sources have to say about it. So on the official IELTS website, it says, every examiner is trained and monitored closely to be fair to every candidate and to assess your level of English. The examiners will not give you more or fewer marks if you are smiling and laughing. So it's quite clear what they're saying there is it doesn't matter what you do in that part 0, it's not going to improve your score. So you can't charm the examiner, you can't be overly friendly. And if you're really nervous, like you demonstrated, and you don't seem like you don't want to be there, you can't lose marks for being unfriendly.
But I imagine it doesn't do any harm to be polite, to be nice, right?
So yes and no. Whatever helps you relax into the test and reduces nerves and stress as much as possible. Like if you are the type of person that not greeting the examiner in a friendly way would make you feel awkward, and you would be thinking about like, have I actually offended them? Then, greet the examiner in a normal human way. But I think that, and this is advice for the teachers out there, if you are giving students advice on how to greet the examiner, you're not giving time to things like grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, fluency, strategy, how to answer the questions. There's a finite amount of time that teachers have to teach students and students have to prepare for the exam. So if you are dedicating, even just 10 or 15 minutes, showing students exactly what to say to the examiner, then you're not spending that 10 or 15 minutes giving them feedback on things that actually matter. So on a more strategic level, I'm not criticizing teachers out there. I'm trying to help you only focus on the things that are actually being tested when they are being tested. And that is giving your students the best possible chance. So is this tip right or wrong? I think that it's wrong. It's not going to do any harm, but there are far more important things that you need to think about, and we'll talk about that later in this video. So we're going to demo the second most popular tip. I want you to watch both of them. Both of them are trying to use this same tip. Watch what they do and try and guess what the tip is. Welcome to the IELTS speaking test. Let's start off by talking about what you normally do on the weekend. What do you normally do on the weekend?
I like to meet my friends on the weekend. We like to go for long walks in the park. And I like to go shopping. And I like to go to the garden with them. And I like to meet them outside their house.
What do you normally like to do on the weekends?
On the weekends, I literally love to cook, and I love inviting all my friends over to my house so we can like eat together and watch a movie. And like I have this really big screen TV, so we really enjoy watching like horror movies over there. And I think it's the best thing to do on the weekends.
So did you spot what the tip was? So one of the most popular YouTube videos in the world on IELTS Speaking, with 13 million views, talks about how important body language is, and hand gestures, and maintaining eye contact. But is this actually true? Will this improve your score? Well, let's have a look what IDP and the British Council have to say about this. On IDP's website, you'll find an article called How to Prepare for the IELTS Speaking Test. And in it says that every examiner is trained and monitored closely to be fair to every candidate and to assess your level of English. The examiners will not give you more or fewer marks if you are smiling and laughing. It is best to relax as much as you can and communicate in a natural way. So what it's saying there is, and this is consistent with examiner training, what they train the examiners on is grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, fluency. What comes out of your mouth, not really your hand gestures, your eye contact, your body language. But some people think that, body language does have an impact on those things, that it can improve pronunciation, fluency, grammar, vocabulary. Is that actually true? And I found an interesting article on the IDP website called 9 Myths About the IELTS Speaking Test to Debunk. And this is what they say. Being polite, courteous, and smiling should be part of basic manners when engaging with anyone in a conversation. It does help the interaction move forward. However, it is not part of the evaluation criteria. You should not worry about being overly polite, but focus on the conversation and topic at hand. We can also look at this video by the British Council where it says students are not assessed on appearance or body language.
But if you have confident body language, isn't it going to help you speak more better?
So I think it really depends on the teacher. And again, this is some advice for teachers out there. When I look at a lot of the feedback that is given to students in one-on-one speaking mock tests, some of them, 80% of the feedback is on hand gestures, body language, eye contact. And to the teachers out there, the students are trusting you. They're not IELTS experts. So if you do a mock speaking test with them, or in the classroom, you're giving feedback and you're talking about those things, the students will automatically think these are important and they will focus on them. And then they will not focus on the really important things, which are grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and fluency. So it is about choosing what you teach the students so that the students understand the importance of each thing, or what is more important than the other. So be very, very careful when you mention things like body language, eye contact, hand gestures, because the students will prioritize them because you are prioritizing them in the classroom. But does it affect your score? No, not at all. So what I would say is just do whatever you want to do that helps you speak fluently and give the best answers. But do realize that 100% of your score is based on the official marking criteria, and IDP, the British Council, say that it doesn't matter at all. So prioritize that. So let's move on to tip number 3, a very, very popular one. What we're going to do is one student is going to use this tip and the other one is going to ignore this tip and not use it at all. I want you to spot which one is which and think about what tip they might be using. What's the best way for an English student to improve their listening skills?
I think documentaries, docuseries. I love long-form content on serial killers. I know that's quite a niche topic, and that's because I'm very easily stimulated by, this may sound weird, but serial killers. Just something about the psychological imbalance that they have. It may seem gruesome to some people, but to me it's quite fascinating because their thought process is very layered. Their thought process is very nuanced. It's not about good versus evil, as some people might think. It's sometimes that they have a lot of mental disorders that stems from a very troubled childhood. And doing a deep dive into that makes me feel like I'm able to humanize the person and maybe not justify their actions, because it's not okay to kill, but maybe understand the human psyche and cause and effect a lot better than someone that just says someone's evil.
For students who are learning English, what's the best way that they could improve their listening skills?
I feel like if they research IELTS content on probably YouTube, there's a lot of outlets out there where they can brush up on their education. And I feel like that's one of the ways that has helped me a lot. And maybe that's something that they could do.
So did you spot the tip? I want you not to think about just the tip, but how fluent was each person? So if we listen to Priyanka's response, it was very, very impressive, but it wasn't as fluent as she normally is. Why do you think you weren't as fluent? So you were constantly stopping and thinking about what to do. Why was that?
Because I was trying to sound as intelligent and was trying really hard to impress you rather than just answering the question as I would normally.
Specifically, how were you trying to sound intelligent?
Using big words, intelligent sounding words to be able to make you think that I was more intelligent.
So all over the internet, you'll find advice saying, don't use normal informal language. Just don't use normal everyday language. You need to use more formal, more academic type words, and that is going to improve your score. Let's see if that is actually true. So if we go to the British Council website and have a look at an article there called IELTS Test Format Explained, it states the content of the IELTS speaking test is the same for both the IELTS academic and IELTS general training test. So academic is what university students in general would do, and the general training test is for everybody else. They just want to move to a new country, so it's not like an academic test. So what does that say? That says that the speaking test is for both exactly the same. So it's not like one is, the academic test requires academic language and the general training test requires more general language. That's not what it's saying. It's saying they're exactly the same and they're assessed in exactly the same way. But let's have a look at what IDP say. In a very interesting article on the IDP website is called Formal and Informal English on IELTS. And it starts off with, you want to get band 9 in IELTS. You might think the above sentence will give you a low score on an IELTS test. However, you might be wrong. IELTS tests your English language skills, and yes, this includes both formal and informal English. So again, this confirms what we see all the time, which is the speaking test is not a formal academic test. It is testing your ability to communicate clearly in English. And as we've seen with you, because you were trying to sound more intelligent by using big words, it was actually lowering your fluency score. And you are at a band 9 level, you have perfect fluency, but by trying too hard, it is actually lowering your score. And it's actually a much fairer reflection of speaking in real life, because like when you move to an English speaking country, what percentage of the time are you going to be speaking in a really formal academic way? Like 1% of the time, maybe. It's very specialist when you're using that kind of language. 99% of the time, you're just using everyday informal language. You're also using things like slang, phrasal verbs, idioms, just everyday idiomatic language that native English speakers would use. And that is showing actually how high level you are, because to learn more informal ways of speaking is actually as advanced as using really, really academic language as well. And what I've done for you guys is I've analyzed hundreds of band 9 transcripts from our successful VIP students, and I've put the 100 most used words into a PDF for you. And I put a lot of exercises in there for you and the vocabulary improvement plan, which shows you how to naturally improve your vocabulary in a very, very sustainable way. It's a complete workbook with all the things you need to improve your vocabulary. Download it in the description or in the pinned comment.
So if I don't use advanced vocabulary, does that mean that I'll get a lower score?
Good question, because that's the next tip we're going to look at, tip number 4. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so tip number 3 was about like academic formal language. Tip number 4 is using more high-level vocabulary, advanced words. And the most common way that this is taught, if you go onto YouTube, if you go and search on Google, is to give students a list of advanced words ask them to memorize them, use them in the test, and this will magically improve their score. So what we're going to do, I'm going to give one of you the actual list from one of the most popular YouTube videos. I'm going to allow you some time to memorize that list, and we're going to ask you to answer a question normally and then using the list. Can you tell me about your home, please, like the house that you live in?
I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city center. It's cozy, it's nice. I don't like houses that are too big, so I liked my home for that very reason. My bedroom's quite spacious, quite big for a house in the city center. It's rustic, all neutral colors inspired by Kim Kardashian. And it's just, it's my safe haven. I love the way it feels. It's comfortable.
Can you tell me about your home, like the house that you live in?
My house is where I feel very serene. And it is in a multi-storied building, high-rise skyscraper building. And the artwork in my house is futuristic and very modern, and my kitchen.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So how did you feel in both answers? So compare how you felt, what was going through your mind.
When I was speaking normally, the first answer that I gave, I felt like I was just answering a question and having a conversation with a friend. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like I was trying to think about, I was just remembering what my house looks like and telling you about it. But in the second answer, I wasn't really focusing on the truth as much as I was trying to use as many big words to impress you. And then I couldn't think of the big words to impress you because not too many to do with your home. And that made me kind of even more nervous and trip up on my words.
And how did you feel when I stopped you? How would you feel if I kept doing that?
I felt like I knew I was messing up as I was doing it because I was struggling to find the words. And then when you stopped me, I was like, oh, yeah, it hurt my confidence for sure.
Yeah, and that would make your fluency even worse. So it would be a downward spiral.
Yeah, the next question would be worse. Yeah.
And that's exactly what we find when we're training students, that when a student comes in and they have terrible fluency, we can spot it immediately what they're trying to do. Like we will literally just stop them and say like, have you memorized the list? Are you trying to regurgitate that list? And they're like, oh, I don't have to do that? It's like, yeah, just speak normally. And they're so afraid of speaking normally because they think that normal speech means a lower score, but it's the exact opposite. If you're just talking normally, that's what the examiners are actually testing. Like, can you speak normally to people in an English-speaking country? That's exactly what they're testing, so that's what gets higher scores. It is not a vocabulary memorization test. It is a speaking communications test. So let's have a look and just confirm this with the British Council. And in that article called Lexis and Vocabulary, it says many candidates memorize impressive lists of vocabulary, but often end up using them in the wrong way because they haven't understood them properly. So by all means, if you can use a topic-specific high-level word from time to time, like when we were discussing your home, that's fine as long as you know how to use it. But as soon as you start to try and use vocabulary that's beyond your level and you're not comfortable using, that's when it affects your fluency. So you lower your fluency score and your vocabulary score. So you're making vocabulary mistakes and it is lowering your fluency score, which is, doubly wrong.
Double whammy.
Double whammy. Let's see what IDP have to say about this. So in their article 10 Tips IELTS Speaking, they state quite clearly, don't use big and unfamiliar words. Very, very clear what they say. They say you might want to impress the examiner with big and complex words in your speaking test, but to be safe, avoid using words you are not familiar with. There is a higher chance of making mistakes by either mispronouncing words or using them in the wrong context. So we talked about a double whammy, vocabulary and fluency, but pronunciation, that's another 25%, so 75%. And we often find this with students who think that they know the word, but they don't know how to pronounce the word. So the meaning might be wrong, the pronunciation might be wrong, and they've spent like the first few how do I say this? And then so you're just making it way more difficult than it needs to actually be.
But vocabulary is a big part of IELTS speaking tests. So if we use simpler words, isn't it going to affect the score?
Yes and no. So there's two approaches that we suggest students do. It's called the moon landing strategy. So during the moon landing, what they would do is before they went to the moon, they would try and break everything. They would take lots of chances and they would stretch all the equipment to breaking point. But once they got to the moon, they played it safe. So during your IELTS preparation, try and stretch your vocabulary as much as possible. Take risks, try and learn new words. But also what you need to realize about vocabulary is the most used words in the English language are common everyday words. And mastering those words are just as important as learning more advanced vocabulary. Like you are both Band 9 speaking students. If we analyze your speaking transcripts, only 5%, say, of the words that you use are C1, C2, like high level words. And that's the same. You can analyze hundreds of Band 9 transcripts from real Band 9 students. 2, 3, 4, 5% of the words are actually high level. But the difference between a Band 6 student and a Band 9 student is a Band 6 student hasn't mastered the lower level words yet, and they're trying to use higher level words at a higher frequency, but unsuccessfully. Whereas a Band 9 student, those A1, A2, B1, B2 level words, they've fully mastered them. They can use them normally without making mistakes. And then from time to time, 4 or 5% of the time, when they need to, they're throwing in one of those higher level words, but only when they 100% know them. And to the teachers out there, I know that many of you give your students long lists of high level words, and that's because your students want them and you think that you're helping them. But always think about what do the students want versus what the students need. Students will tell you they want lists of words, they want samples, they want templates, things like that, but is it actually improving their score? You're not their friend, you're their teacher. You're not there to be popular, you're there to be effective. So by all means, help them sustainably improve their vocabulary, but really do encourage them on test day to only use the vocabulary that will get them a higher score, which is the vocabulary they fully mastered already.
But what about for the common topics? Do you think it's a good idea to memorize bigger vocabulary for those common questions?
Well, that's actually tip number 5. Let's look to see if there are actually any common topics, because if there are, that would help us. So if we look at the IELTS official website, they have an article there called IELTS Speaking Test Topics, and they do give examples of some questions that come up again and again, but they don't give any common topics. And if we look at the IDP website, there's an article which states in part 1, the examiner will ask you about yourself and general questions from common topics like work, family, studies, interests, and hobbies. And this is actually true. You've probably noticed that when we do our mock speaking tests, the first questions are normally every day getting to know you chit-chat questions like your home, your family, your interests, what you do at the weekend. These same topics do come up again and again. But you've probably noticed that I also have asked you guys questions like this. Is music an important subject in schools in your country?
In schools in my country?
Are there any celebrities that you do not like?
Oh,
So can you remember any weird questions that I asked you before?
weird questions.
Weird topics you weren't expecting?
Will AI replace actual
Yes, that's what I
teachers?
wanted to say as well. Will AI replace teachers?
Yeah, they might ask you something like that, like really quite advanced, like about AI, for example. Or in part 1, they might ask you a completely random topic like, do you like hats? Or what do you think about birthday cakes? So what we've found and what examiners see every day is when they ask students questions that they're expecting, like tell me about your home, tell me about your family, what do you do at the weekend? They give very good answers because they are prepared for those common topics. The strategy that examiners use is then they'll throw in a random topic. Like, let's talk about birthday cakes. Let's talk about hats. Let's talk about gardening. Let's talk about jewelry. And they will judge your English level really on how you react to those questions that you were not expecting, not the topics that you were expecting. And they will try and see, is there a huge difference between tell me about your family, or do you work or study, and how often do you wear hats? Because that's testing your real English level. So if you go and work in an English speaking country, they're not only going to be asking you about, like, tell me about your family and your career, they'll be asking you about more common topics. And if you can't speak about those rarer topics, then your English level isn't that high. So telling students, prepare for these common topics, it sounds good. Again, if you're a teacher, I'm not criticizing you. It sounds like you're coming from a good place. You have a good heart. You're trying to help your students, but you might actually be leading them towards lower scores, because the key is to prepare them for all topics, not just the common ones that come up again and again in part 1.
So that's part 1. What about part 2 and part 3?
So part 1, there are those common topics. Like, they'll probably start off with, do you work or do you study? And then talk about either your home or your neighborhood, your likes and dislikes, and then throw in a few random topics. So you need to be prepared for those. Parts 2 and parts 3, there are no common topics. Even if you look online and you find like common part 2 topics, common part 3 topics, these articles, I don't want to be too critical, but they're not true. You have to expect the unexpected in part 2 and part 3. So overall, there's no harm in preparing for the common topics that might come up in part 1, but do remember that you need to be able to answer questions on any topic. But there's one thing that you should never do when you're preparing common topics. Can you guess what it is?
Speak in a language other than English.
No. Okay, let's find out what that thing that you should never do is. So if we look at the British Council article, 8 Ways to Boost Your IELTS Speaking Score, it states, while it certainly pays off equipping yourself with relevant vocabulary, uncommon phrases and collocations, it's important to avoid memorizing large chunks of speech. So the thing that you should never do is memorize whole answers, or as it says, chunks of speech, even parts of sentences. You should never memorize those. And let's look at why it is so important, because it is a very common strategy amongst many students. Let's look at how damaging it can be to actually memorize answers. So the first reason you should never do it is examiners are actually trained to spot memorized answers. It's part of their training. But if an examiner has been doing their job like for more than a couple of months, it becomes very natural for them to be able to spot memorized answers. A lot of students say, how can they spot it? If you're doing the same thing again and again all day, every day, it becomes extremely easy, and it's easy to spot the difference between a memorized answer and a normal answer. And the other thing is that it can be quite insulting, because if you memorize an answer and you give it to the examiner, what you're basically saying to the examiner is like, I'm trying to trick you. I'm smarter than you. I'm trying to outsmart you. You're not. And it's quite insulting. You know, the examiner isn't going to give you a lower mark for feeling insulted, but they definitely will give you a lower mark because you've memorized answers. So that's more, whole sentences or whole paragraphs or whole answers that students memorize. But let's go down to a more granular level of memorizing phrases or parts of sentences. If you think about it, which phrases are the ones that examiners hear the most?
Filler, like connecting words, probably.
Definitely, that would be a type of word that they would hear. But the ones that they will hear the most are the ones contained in the most popular YouTube videos that are teaching memorization.
Really?
Yes. So the more popular the person teaching it, or the more popular or the higher up on Google it is, the more it's clicked on, the higher frequency the examiners hear that, and the more likely the examiner is to go like, okay, you've just memorized this. So you need to be very, very careful with this strategy. Especially, I think a lot of students see the number of views on a video, or they see like, this is a big popular teacher, therefore I can trust them. The opposite is true. The more it is used, the less likely it is to be effective. And the more likely it is that the examiner will spot it immediately. Believe me, it's very easy to spot.
Could you give us examples of like 5 words off the top of your head that are very commonly thrown around?
Yeah. Nowadays, in modern life, day by day, plethora is ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous. Wow. Okay.
And examiners will also play a really sneaky trick on you if they think that you're memorizing stuff. They will throw in a completely random topic, a question that they know you haven't prepared, and they'll throw that at you, and they'll base their score more likely on the answer to that answer. So that's how they deal with that. And because they know that you might have, okay, I've prepared an answer for this, or prepared an answer for that, or I've memorized this. Like, okay, let's talk about, how AI will replace teachers in the future. And like, I have not really thought about, so if your answer to that is, I haven't really thought about that, you've just proved to the examiner, I can only deal with questions where my memorization techniques will work. Memorization and communication are two completely different things. Memorization and intelligence are two completely different things. And again, some of you come from educational backgrounds where you're taught rote learning, and many of you believe that memorization does equal intelligence. For IELTS, that's not the case. In the Western world, that is not the case. We do not really learn through rote learning and memorization. We learn in a completely different way. So not criticizing any countries or cultures or anything like that, but you need to be aware of the system that you're trying to apply to, which is the Western world.
But what if they throw a question at us that we genuinely don't know anything about? How would we handle something like that?
That's a good question. I think this is why students memorize answers and memorize chunks of language and things like that, because of this fear. They fear, what if I get a topic I know nothing about? So the first thing to remember is it's not a test of knowledge. It's a test of speaking. So let's do a little demo. Tell me about an Indian dish that you love and how do you cook it?
An Indian dish that I love would be chicken and rice. It's a sort of curry, and I like it spicy. And a lot of people in my family love it too. So it's usually, we all like spicy, so it's usually the same taste, and it has been for a lot of years. We put some potatoes in there and we eat it with plain boiled rice, and it's delicious.
Now tell me about an Irish dish and how you cook it.
I don't know.
Okay. Imagine we're in the speaking test. What would you say?
I don't know much about Irish food, so I haven't cooked an Irish dish, but I would love to know.
Exactly. So you haven't just said, I don't know. You've explained to the examiner, I'm not from Ireland. I don't know anything about Irish cooking, but I would love to know more about it. That will send a signal to the examiner that, okay, they don't know much about this topic. It's not a speaking problem because they were able to clearly explain why they know nothing about Irish cooking. They were able to clearly communicate that. And the examiner will then go, okay, she probably knows more about another topic. Let's talk about something else. And then you'll demonstrate how great your English is. And remember, your answer doesn't hinge on one bad answer. That's why they ask you a range of different topics and 3 different parts. So always be honest with the examiner if you don't know anything about that topic. Like, don't do it if you don't feel just, I don't really prefer that topic, or it's a little bit uncomfortable. If that's the case, you just give the examiner as much as you know and be very open. Like, I don't know a huge amount about this topic, but here's what I would say. That is far more impressive than somebody who memorizes answers for topics they're expecting, and then you ask them about something like Irish cooking, and they're just like, I don't know. So always think about that. And it's also unusual that the examiners will ask you multiple topics and multiple questions about things that you don't know anything about. In general, they will ask you things that the vast majority of the whole world will be able to answer give some kind of an answer.
Yeah. And it's also usually in part 3, right? Where they ask you.
Yeah, like part 3 is where they're trying to really stretch you. So part 3, if they're asking you more difficult questions, it's because they think you're good. It's because they think you deserve a band 7, 8, or 9. They have a range of different questions that they can ask you. And if they're asking you increasingly difficult questions, that's a good sign, because they know that you can cope with those, and they're maybe thinking, does this person deserve an 8 or 8.5 or 9? Let's ask them really difficult questions. They don't if they think that you're like a band 5, band 6, they won't ask you that many difficult questions in part 3. So be happy if you get them.
Oh, good to know.
So for the next tip, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to ask the same question to both students. One of them will answer it normally. The other one will try and use the tip as much as possible. Again, I want you to try and think about what they're doing, think about the tip, what it might be, and the difference in the level of answers. How do you think education will change in the future?
I believe everything is going to become more digital, and people are going to rely more on devices and gadgets for studying instead of pen and paper and books like it used to be back in the days. And also, I feel like they'll find their educational materials online instead of in books like we used to have.
How do you think education will change in the future?
Oh, I'm over the moon that you've asked me this question because I'm a teacher myself. I think the reason people criticize today's education is because there's this concept of the grass always being greener on the other side. In the future, the focus will perhaps be a lot more on critical thinking rather than memorizing information like unfortunately, we have today. But I think the icing on the cake with education in the future is that although it's a double-edged sword, people will be able to focus on things that are more important. And day by day, things will get better. I think it will improve for the better. You know what they say, you gotta make hay while the sun shines.
So did you spot that tip? Let's analyze both answers and think about the idiomatic language used in each answer. So for this one, here's all of the idioms and here's the ones that she used correctly. And what we did with this answer was I gave her a list of the most common idioms that are taught on YouTube and online to IELTS students. And what I did with this student was I said, just answer the question normally. We didn't tell her about idioms at all. But let's look at the idiomatic language that was used in her answer. And let's look at the ones that she used correctly. So that's just two answers. You know, a lot of teachers do use idioms, and that's going to increase your score. Is this actually true or not? So where this comes from is if you actually look at the official marking criteria. For a band 7, it says uses some less common and idiomatic vocabulary and shows some awareness of style and collocation with some appropriate choices. So it does actually say in the marking criteria, it does talk about idiomatic vocabulary. But where most people who talk about this go wrong, or where most teachers who give students lists of idioms to learn, is idiomatic language and idioms are not necessarily the same thing. So idiomatic language does include idioms, but it also includes more informal language like phrasal verbs, slang, colloquialisms, things like that. And if we look at the definition of the word idiomatic in Collins Dictionary, it says idiomatic language uses words in a way that sounds natural to native speakers of the language. And if we look at the Cambridge Dictionary definition, it says containing expressions that are natural and correct. So to summarize what idiomatic means, it's language that native English speakers would normally use. It's different from what learners of English would use, because learners of English are normally using textbook English. But if you listen to, like, when you guys have traveled to English speaking countries, do people sound weird? Like, do they sound like how you would hear them in a textbook, or is it different?
It sounds a lot more informal, a lot more, like you said,
Conversational.
daily slangs and things. It doesn't sound forced or...
Yeah. So a lot of people we work with, we help them get the score that they need, and they move somewhere like Scotland or Ireland, and they're like, thanks very much for helping me get a band 7, but I have no idea what these people are saying. And it's like, oh, it's just because they're using English, but it's a different form of English. Like, if you were in the pub with me and my friends, you wouldn't understand a word I'm saying most of the time. I don't speak like this to my friends. So what the official marking criteria is saying when it talks about idiomatic language is that a person at a band 7 uses some of the language that a native English speaker would use, but they don't use it completely accurately. There are some inappropriate choices, there may be some inaccuracies, but they're attempting to use the same type of language that a native English speaker would use. Now, this is completely different from how idioms are taught. How idioms are taught by a lot of people is give students a list of idioms, memorize them, use as many as they can. And what this does is, as we saw in your example, even though Priyanka is a band 9 student, she made lots and lots of errors, and she was much less fluent than she normally is. And if we look at the IDP website, they have an article on their website called How to Use Idioms. And in it, it states, in English, we use idioms and phrasal verbs to express ourselves. This idiomatic language is used frequently in our everyday communication. So it's very important that we understand what idioms are and how to use them. So is this saying use lots of idioms and you'll get a high score? Well, it goes on to say, we mentioned that native English speakers use idioms naturally. And the key word there is naturally. Learning a list and trying to insert as many as possible is the opposite of natural. Like if you listen to two native English speakers talking on a podcast and you counted the number of idioms in an hour and a half of them speaking, it might be 10 in the whole hour and a half. We do use them, but it is quite rare. Mm-hmm. What is more common is using more informal language, slang, phrasal verbs, things like that. Idioms are actually not that common. Mm-hmm. That brings me on to a really good exercise that you could do is, you really love serial killer podcasts. Like pick one where it's maybe one or two. Conversational English is best for this. So maybe 2 or 3 people talking about the topic, and listen and try and notice not just the idioms, but the slang that they use. Normally that will be things that you don't really understand, or maybe local language that they're using, or phrasal verbs. Write down something that you don't understand. Don't write down all the things you do understand. This is already in your brain. But anything you don't understand, just note it down. And then most YouTube videos have transcripts where you could actually go and look at the transcript, look at it in context, guess what that means, and then do a quick Google search, check what it means, and then over time just add in, my little list of slang phrases, my little list of phrasal verbs, my little list of idioms, and then try and use them when you're practicing your IELTS test. Just get some practice questions and then listen back, record yourself on your phone, listen back. Did you actually use them appropriately? Did you use them accurately, or are you overusing them, or are you mispronouncing them? And that way that you can just naturally up your idiomatic language and improve over time. Most people don't want to hear that. They just want a list, but lists are going to lower your score, not improve it. So the last tip is all about speaking part 2. Speaking part 2 is the part that a lot of students fear and they worry a lot about. So we want to definitely help our viewers with that. I'm not going to tell you what the tip is. I'm just going to give you both a question, the same question. One of you is going to use the tip and the other one is not going to use the tip. In the real test, what the examiner would say is, look at the cue card. You have 1 minute to prepare. You can make notes, and I'll then ask you at the end of 1 minute to speak for 2 minutes.
Something I worked on that I found to be a difficult task, both academically and in my workplace, is being able to speak slow enough. I speak very fast, naturally. You may not feel that way in the conversations that we've had, because I've had to work on that quite a bit. It was difficult for me. My brain works quite quickly, and it can bounce off things quite from one topic to the other. So I really had to make an effort to slow that down so that I don't sound like a train. So the way that I would work on it is by giving myself a beat before I say something and giving myself a beat after I say something, although I have the next 10 sentences already figured out in my brain. I realized that it just sounds a lot more coherent if I'm able to verbalize my thought and realize that there's no hurry. I have nowhere to go. I've got nothing else to do. So I give each sentence enough time and importance. When I felt that, how I felt when I'd completed the task, I felt like it really improved my communication, because it's not only what goes on internally inside your brain. It's not just enough for you to understand something, especially when you're in your place of work. It's very important on how you communicate that thought to someone else and how you wait to hear what they have to say and then formulate a thought and communicate it back. That's sometimes even more important than the original thought that you had.
Very good. So, exact same question, but I want you to do it slightly differently. I don't want you to make any notes. I want you to follow this bullet point, talk about that, then talk about this bullet point, then talk about this bullet point, then talk about this bullet point, in that order, and only talk about those bullet points. So you have 1 minute to just think about that. Don't make any notes, just talk about the bullet points.
What task did I do? The task that I had to do was understand what I was studying instead of just memorizing it. Why this task was very difficult? It was very difficult because usually when you're trying to memorize something, you tend to forget, and that puts a pressure on you. How you worked on this task? I took my time to understand each and every sentence instead of just memorizing it. Explain how you felt when you had successfully I felt like I was having much more knowledge.
Good. So the people at home, think about those two responses. Think about which one was more developed, who got to the 2 minutes without any problems, who sounded more fluent, and generally which answer felt better to you. So if we think about those two answers and the strategy that was used, one of them was using the most common tip for part 2 of the test, and one of them wasn't. This answer, she just answered it with freedom. She kept talking about the main topic, but she didn't really focus on the bullet points. She used some of them, but she didn't rigidly stick to them. And she was able to speak freely and naturally without using the bullet points as a crutch. Whereas if we compare it with you, like these are both band 9 students. You got a band 9 in the real test. But what I did was I forced you to use the most common tip, which is talk about bullet point number 1, then talk about bullet point number 2, then 3, then 4, and only do that. How did it feel answering that question in that way, because when you do part 2, you normally do very, very well. You didn't do so well that time. Why do you think it was?
I felt a certain pressure to do exactly what is in this tips, and I also felt a lot more robotic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. See, you were looking at each
Yeah.
one, and then you also didn't get to the 2 minutes. So for you, that wouldn't be a huge problem because you're a band 9 student. I would just go like this and you would continue to talk. But for someone at a band 6, band 7 level, if they get to the end of the bullet points, they just start to panic, like, oh my, I have nothing else to say. And then that can destroy the rest of their test. So telling students, you must talk about bullet point number 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, it does more harm than good.
Can you actually use the bullet points that are given as a guideline and still have your own notes and refer to the bullet points and the guideline?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's exactly the strategy that we teach. So we teach students that the bullet points are there to help you, but some of them, there might be one in there. Like, for example, they often say, how did you feel? Some people like me, I don't like talking about my feelings. So, and even as a native English speaker, I'd be like,
that's an intrusive question.
I don't know. And I would start to sound very bad. But like what happened with you, if you stick rigidly to the bullet points, some of them, like, for example, there might be one that says, like, talk about your phone. What brand is it? Like, oh, it's Apple. Like, what else am I going to say about it? That's 3 seconds out of 2 minutes. So often people will get to the end of the bullet points after 45 seconds or 60 seconds. And then it's like, oh, I have a new mountain to climb. I now have to think about more things to say. So what we teach students is look at the 4 bullet points. Which of them are you comfortable talking about at length? It might be 4, it might be 3, it might be 2.
Right.
And then look at the topic at the top. What other things do you feel more comfortable talking about? Like for you, you're a great storyteller, so it could be the story of that. You probably like talking about your feelings and how so maybe it was that. But whatever you feel comfortable talking about, add in those bullet points as you did, and that gives you complete freedom for the 2 minutes. And if you want more details on how to use that strategy, I've put it in the PDF with the 100 most common words, practice questions, transcripts from successful students, and you can use those to improve your score. Get it in the description and the pinned comment. If you've enjoyed this video on speaking tips, you probably need help with writing tips as well. Click this video if you need help with writing tips.